Hi, everyone. Welcome to our discussion on D-Day with famed journalist and author Alex Kershaw. I am Jim Hake, the founder and CEO at Spirit of America, and I'm very happy to see so many of our supporters on the call today, including members of our board. I want to thank you for being with us today and for your support always. For those who don't know us, Spirit of America is a privately funded, nonprofit citizen service organization, and we work alongside U.S. troops and diplomats all over the world and provide private assistance in support of their missions to help them preserve the promise of a free and better life. And as you can tell, that's very related to what happened on D-Day 80 years ago. And D-Day is especially important for all of us because it so powerfully represents Americans and our allies doing their part to defend freedom and democracy. And Spirit of America is all about citizens doing their part toward the same cause. And D-Day has a personal meaning for me. My late father was part of the D-Day invasion. He served with the U.S. Navy at Utah Beach. And, we celebrate, he was part of what we refer to as the greatest generation. And we rightly celebrate that generation. And it's true that we absolutely stand on their shoulders today. And what made that generation great was that so many Americans did their part. And because they did their part, they set the world on a new trajectory. And since World War II, we have enjoyed prosperity, security, and freedom unprecedented in human history. But that's because we won. And the D-Day invasion was the pivotal moment in that victory of freedom over fascism. And Alex is going to talk about that and what it means to us today. If you have any questions, please submit them via the Q&A button down there at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. We'll do our best to get to them. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Alex Kershaw. He is a New York Times best-selling author. He's written 27 books. A number of those have been focused on D-Day itself, and some have been made into TV series. So Alex, it's a real honor to have you today. Thank you for being with us, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great honor and delight to be with you. I'm actually talking to you from Washington, D.C. I've spent most of the day at the National World War II Memorial. I'm the resident historian, and it's been a long but emotional and very inspiring day. So what I thought I would do is take you through a few images that evoke D-Day, and then we can discuss, as you mentioned, the importance of 6th of June, 1944. Here is one of my favorite American presidents. I don't just like Ike, I love him. And this photograph was taken yesterday evening in England at around about 8:30 p.m. Ike, Allied Supreme Commander, 54 years old, smoking 80 filterless cigarettes a day, ears ringing, hands shaking from the tremors of stress. He's there talking to actually a guy called Lieutenant Lawrence Strobel, actually from, like Ike, from Kansas. This is Ike wishing good luck and farewell to E Company of the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne. It's probably the most iconic shot involving Ike surrounding D-Day. The guy is talking to Strobel with the number 23 around his neck. He'll actually fall into a tree earlier, actually fell into a tree early this morning, but he survived the war. And later on, many years later on, he said that he was reunited with Ike very briefly when Ike ran for president. And he said it was the quickest handshake in history because Ike was on a whistle-top campaign tour. But anyway, that gives you, it's a beautiful photograph. The thing that I should stress about this is that here we have an image of a great, great leader, a fantastic diplomat, a politician, obviously, but a man who was under enormous stress at the moment that this photograph was taken. He's the only guy that can say, go. It was his order, let's go. early on the 5th of June that set in motion the greatest military operation of World War II. You should also know that he's been told just a few weeks ago by Lee Mallory, who heads the Allied Air Forces on D-Day, that by employing the 82nd Airborne and the 101st Airborne, Ike is making a terrible mistake. Lee Mallory basically writes to Eisenhower and says, over 75% of those elite troops are going to be wasted. Do not do it. Do not waste such a large number of American lives, over 13,000 US paratroopers from the 82nd and 101st Airborne. But such is the nature of leadership, such is the nature of this great man. He listened and thankfully ignored Lee Mallory's advice, and the operations on D-Day for the 101st Airborne and 82nd Airborne were a great success. Many men dispersed over a 50-mile wide area. Full command of the 82nd Airborne, full control, took 2 days to establish, but they did the job. They did what they were sent to do, and as we know, D-Day was a success, thanks in part to the airborne operations. We'll move on to the next image now, please. And here you have, whenever I show this photograph, I always say, if you are looking for an image of American badasses, look no further, because these are the first 18 Americans to see action on D-Day. They were dropped in by Plane 1 at 12:15 a.m. this morning, 6th of June. They are pathfinders. Their job is to set up beacons and radars to guide in a beautiful sky train of over 6,500 of their fellow Screaming Eagles. So when they jumped out of a C-47 from around about 400 to 500 feet, it took about 20 seconds for them to drop and hit the ground. And there you have the first 18 Americans officially to see action to begin to liberate Northwestern Europe on D-Day 80 years ago today. Awesome, awesome young Americans. Next image, please.
Hey, Alex, may I ask, did all 18 of them survive the war?
Only one of them was killed on D-Day. As far as I know, the majority of them survived the war. But very good question.
Thank
you. Here we have probably my favorite image, speaking as a Brit. I've been in the US for 30 years, but my heart beats faster when I see this image, because this is Lord Lovat and Bill Millen. Lovat is ahead of Millen. He was in the foreground, and you can see he's wearing a commando beret, and he's also carrying bagpipes. And so if you look down just to the left into the water, you'll see a figure there wading ashore, and that's Lord Lovat, who was in command of 2,500 British commandos, and they arrived at Sword Beach, one of the 5 landing beaches, a British beach, at around 8:30 a.m. So this is about 8:30, 8:45 a.m. on D-Day. Lovat is a great character. He was a Scottish aristocrat, had a hunting estate of over 20,000 acres, and this is in fact only his 3rd day of action in World War II. He'd been on 2 previous commando raids, but this is only his 3rd day of action. Millen, after the war, of course he survived, after the war said that he allowed his commanding officer, Lovat, to go first because he wanted him to test the water, see how deep it was. He's only guy with a bagpipe, only guy wearing a kilt from over 150,000 Allied soldiers who by now, as I'm actually speaking to you, have landed on a 50-mile wide beachhead in Normandy. And Millen said that when he actually got into the water, his kilt rose up as if he was wearing a tutu. It was floating in the water, and it's just a remarkable shot, because so many people have written about Lord Lovat and Bill Millen. They're both characters in the really famous movie The Longest Day, but here extraordinarily you see a real scene of the only Piper on D-Day to follow his commanding officer ashore. So it's a wonderful, wonderful image. Thank you. If we could move on to the next one, please. I get very nostalgic. Today, I've been, I'll be honest with you, I've been close to tears a few times, remembering guys like this. I've been writing about World War II since my late 20s, and I've been to the Normandy beaches so many times. I was there just a couple of weeks ago, and I've actually been on Omaha Beach. I've been at Pointe du Hoc with World War II veterans. This is one of my favorite, a ranger called Dan Farley. He actually was in A Company of the 2nd Ranger Battalion. He landed on Omaha Beach. Those of you who have seen Saving Private Ryan, the first 20 minutes of that film are set where Farley actually came ashore. The guys in the movie are belong to the 29th Infantry Division and the 2nd Ranger Battalion. And Dan actually landed there around about H hour, 6:30 in the morning, and managed to cross the bloodiest sands on D-Day. That's Dog Green sector of Omaha Beach. 8 sectors on the beach. By far the bloodiest was Dog Green sector. And so when I crossed the beach with him 10 years ago, actually on D-Day, he didn't say a word. He was speechless. It was the first time he'd been back to Normandy since 1944. My main job, I should say, while I was with him for a few days, was to supply him with whiskey. So he took quite a bit of Dutch courage that morning, and he couldn't. He was speechless. The memories were so vivid. It was as if he was back there in 1944. Anyway, finally, a couple of hours after we'd crossed the beach, we got to Pointe du Hoc. That's where his fellow rangers performed incredible heroics, scaling the cliffs of Pointe du Hoc. And he finally started to speak. And these are some of the guests on a tour I was doing that are listening to him. And they're in absolute rapt attention. Because what he's talking about there is how he got across the beach. And then the 2 days it took him with his fellow rangers to fight from Omaha Beach around about 8 miles away to Pointe du Hoc, where he and others relieved D Company of the 2nd Ranger Battalion around about 10 o'clock in the morning on the 8th of June. So the Rangers, 225 Rangers landed at Pointe du Hoc. By the time Dan got there, 2 days later, only around about 90 could stand and fight. It was a big, big moment. He's a wonderful guy, passed away several years ago. Just extraordinarily modest, funny, wonderful to be around. And boy, did he love his whiskey. he drank a lot while I was with him. Next photograph, please. Leon Gautier. This is a photograph taken by my best friend of many, many years. This is Leon Gautier, and he was one of 177 Frenchmen who had the incredible honor of liberating their country on D-Day as a Kiefer commando under the command, ultimately, of Lord Lovat, who you just saw going ashore on Sword Beach. Leon Gautier passed away last July. He was 102 years old. And think about this. He was the last, before he died, he was the last surviving French commando who saw action on D-Day. So when he passed, there were headlines all over France. It made the news here. It was as if a god had disappeared. There, he's looking at a map, and he's actually tracing his route along Sword Beach, the route that he took armed with a Tommy gun. And he's showing me the eight or nine, I think 8 German pillboxes that he personally cleared with others from his commando unit. So an image of a great Frenchman and one of our dearest allies and most important allies. The French actually fought with us on D-Day to liberate their own country. Next image, please. I've been very busy on Twitter today, and I've actually, in just about half an hour ago, I finished tweeting lots of images of Bedford boys and their relatives When we talk about D-Day, we can talk about the geopolitical implications later on, but D-Day for me, as I speak to you right now, comes down to individuals. Quite a few Americans that I've known really well and befriended. And the loss today of over 2,500 Americans, in all, over 10,000 Allied casualties. The loss today of those 2,500 Americans is personified by these 19 men from Bedford, Virginia. The town had a population of around about 3,000 in 1944. And from that one town, think of this, that one town, these 19 men lost their lives today. The reason why the National D-Day Memorial is in Bedford, Virginia, and not in DC, is because Bedford suffered the highest per capita loss of any Allied community on D-Day. And there you have the faces of ultimate sacrifice today. All of those boys gone from that one small community in Virginia. Next image, please. Oh, I think we're finished with the images. So I just wanted to give you a few snapshots of D-Day, talk a little bit about some of the people I've met, and try and personalize it there at the end. So I'll be very happy to answer, any questions that you have.
We do have questions, and again, anyone, you may submit a question at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar through that little Q&A with a question mark in it. Alex, you just said with the Bedford boys that D-Day comes down to individuals, and with such a massive undertaking like that, explain what you mean that it comes down to individuals.
Well, I'll give you what I think is a fantastic example. Around about 11 o'clock this morning, Omar Bradley was on the USS Augusta around 5 miles from Omaha Beach. There's a really famous photograph taken of him, and he's looking at Omaha Beach. And what he was thinking earlier today was, this is a huge disaster. I planned this operation, and now it has gone awfully wrong. He's received messages. One was that we are being butchered like hogs. And what he's thinking is that maybe I should pull off the US 1st Infantry Division and the 29th Division, the 2 US divisions on Omaha Beach, because this has gone terribly, terribly wrong. So literally for about an hour this morning, Bradley was seriously considering pulling US troops off Omaha Beach. Had he done that, D-Day, I believe, and many other historians believe, would have been a failure. And Bradley himself said that there was no plan B, and we would not have gone back. Imagine what that would have meant to countless millions of Europeans. And so, what was it that changed his mind, that changed history today? It was sparse but important reports coming from Omaha Beach that some Americans, small groups of Americans, had finally been able to break off that beach. I would argue that maybe 200 to 300 Americans at most had the courage, the grit, the willpower to stand up when they were under enormous machine gun fire and to run into literally a hail of enemy bullets and get off that beach. They were not going to stay there and die. They were going to die trying to get off. And some of them did. So when we talk about history and how small numbers of individuals can make a massive difference, there is no better example than those men who defied the odds and led other Americans off Omaha Beach this morning. Because they did that, Omar Bradley decided, okay, we're going to stay. And therefore, D-Day was a success.
That's an incredible way to view it all. A few questions from some of our attendees here. I think going back to one of your earlier photos, Alex, question is, it looks like the British managed to get some tanks ashore. Is that right? And then he notes, he just listened to the 1964 Eisenhower-Cronkite interview where Eisenhower talked about all the U.S. tanks sinking. So what was the story there?
Well, we did get a much larger proportion of our tanks ashore, and they did what they were supposed to do on Omaha Beach, which was to clear paths for the first wave of troops that came behind. Unfortunately, most of the tanks were dropped into the ocean, literally 5-10 miles away from the shore, and most of them sank. So it was a terrible, terrible loss of life there. You know, everything that could have gone wrong went wrong at Omaha Beach. It was in many ways, it's the kind of case study today of a bad amphibious invasion. We bombed the hell out of the area before troops arrived, but not one single Allied bomb landed on German defenses along the 5.5 miles of Omaha Beach. There were no craters in the beach for protection. All of the German defenses were intact, and therefore it was a bloodbath.
And how did that go so wrong in terms of the bombing before the invasion?
Well, I know that your father landed at Utah Beach. Am I right in thinking that? He landed
Yes,
at
right.
Utah Beach. 197 casualties from almost 30,000 Americans landed on Utah Beach on D-Day. It's an extraordinary success story and an amazing achievement. And that's because we carpet bombed behind Utah Beach very, very effectively. And we did a parallel bombing. So with Omaha, the planes there's Omaha Beach. The planes are coming like this at 5,000 feet, 3,000 foot, very thick cloud cover. At Utah, we followed the beach like that, parallel to the beach. And we bombed just 4 or 5 minutes. The last wave of bombers went over 3 or 4 minutes before the first Americans arrived. And we literally destroyed almost everything along that beach. And therefore, when your father and others arrived at Utah, there was minimal German resistance along most of the beach. At Omaha, hardly any bombs landed on the beach. None destroyed any of the German defenses, which is why you have over 900 Americans killed on Omaha, over 2,500 casualties, as compared to less than 200 casualties on Utah Beach.
Interesting. And they're separated. If you go due west from Omaha to Utah, it's about 5 or 6 miles, something along those lines.
Actually, it's more like about 20 miles.
20. Okay.
And this goes to my point about what would have happened if Bradley had pulled off troops from Omaha. You would have had a very big gap between the British at the nearest beach, which was Gold, and the Americans at Utah. That would have been at least 25 miles. Now, imagine that gap between isolated American forces and the British and Canadians. The Germans would have exploited that quickly, and I believe very effectively.
Another question. How confident was Eisenhower that the plan would succeed?
Not confident at all. There wasn't a single Allied senior commander who confident that this would succeed, that was going to bet a large amount of money that this would work. Churchill was perhaps the most worried senior figure of all. He predicted that the English Channel would run red with at least 10,000, the blood of at least 10,000 Allied soldiers on D-Day. He was perhaps the most concerned. Eisenhower was very concerned. You know, I think it's a marvel that he actually didn't have a heart attack during the preparation for D-Day, that he actually could endure the stress. After he'd given the decision to go on the 5th of June, after he'd said goodbye to the airborne, he went back to his headquarters, and an aide of his driver, Kay Summersby, gave him a massage. And she said in her memoir that when she massaged his back, at the lower part of his back, there was a knot like iron of muscle. He was so stressed. But you know, he prevailed. I think when you mentioned the Walter Cronkite interview when he goes back, I think it was 1964. Unbelievably beautiful images of him walking through those rows of white crosses. 9,387 Americans buried there today. And you can see his face. There's an image that I love above all, which is a close-up of Eisenhower sitting next to some graves. And you can see the grief on his face. The grief from a guy 20 years later remembering all those young Americans that he sent, he sent to their deaths on D-Day.
And beyond D-Day, you've written many times about many books related to World War II. And what are the lessons from D-Day and World War II that you think are most relevant to the world today?
I'll answer that by saying that one of the things I do in my job for the World War II Memorial is I go into high schools. I've been into over 50 high schools in the last year. And in each high school, I ask this question: is there a chapter in your almost 250 years of history, US history, that makes you proud to be a young American? And in those 50 high schools, maybe one or two people out of 50 high schools have actually put up their hand and given me an example of an event in their history that makes them feel proud. And so after I've finished with them, I say to them, if you can't be proud as an American, as a young American, as the next great generation of what your country achieved in World War II, what the hell can you be proud of? And I do it because it's important. We will face great challenges to this country in the future. If you look at world history, if you look at human history, it's more about war than it is about peace. We are kidding ourselves if we think that we are not going to have to defend this great republic and democracy again in a serious way. And so we need young Americans to be proud of their country so that they will serve, that they will fight, that if it comes to it, they'll do what their forefathers did on Omaha Beach and your father did on Utah Beach. They need to be instilled with the fervor of service, of being proud to be an American, so they may want to defend the democracy that they enjoy. And there's no better example, I think, than World War II to get kids, young Americans, stirred up and make them proud. And I've showed you images today, but I show a lot of images to these kids that I talk to. And I say to them, who do you think won World War II? Is it the 99-year-old that I was at the World War II Memorial with today, just a few hours ago? Or was it you? Because if you look closely at the images, they're 18 and 19 and 20. The average age of an American killed in World War II was 22. 18-year-olds were being drafted in 1944 and were in the front lines just 2 or 3 months later. Young Americans, World War II. And it's young Americans that we're going to need to defend us and protect this democracy in the future.
Well, that is why I was going to ask, and I think you just touched on it. First, I don't think we have to wait too long for those challenges, unfortunately, you're talking about. But having studied the greatest generation as closely as you have, how do you think Americans today stack up?
Every time I've been with members of the US military, I have felt very confident that they can step up and do the job. They have done and they will. They're truly, truly inspiring. I only hope that the vast majority of Americans can understand what freedom really means and the price of freedom, the cost of freedom, and understand some history, that this country's great privileges, great luxuries, its amazing history has been bought with blood. And that we really do need people to be inspired by stories such as World War II so that we can be vigilant. Leon Gautier, the Frenchman that I showed you, his final words to me were, a new generation now needs to take over from us. A new generation needs to be vigilant, just as we were during World War II. Vigilance is the word.
I wish we had another hour or two to speak with you, Alex, but we're just about at what we are at time. I want to ask you, your newest book is Patton's Prayer, a true story of courage, faith, and victory in World War II. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
It follows Patton through his finest hours, which were December 1944, January 1945, when he was the most outstanding American commander during the Battle of the Bulge. So it's a study of a great, great American warrior, my favorite general from World War II, and a guy that got wars won and did so with great panache, great planning, extraordinary intellect, and pure courage and guts.
Well, thank you. I hope we can all look forward to reading that. Everyone here can look forward to reading that. And I'm sorry we didn't get to more of the questions. I really wish we could. But I want to thank everyone for being with us to understand and celebrate how Americans did their part 80 years ago today. And if you want to know how you can do your part in today's world, please join us at Spirit of America. We are a coalition of the can-do. So, Alex, thank you for being with us. It was great to see you, and I'll see you tonight in person.
Thank you very much. It was great fun, great honor.
Take care.